The sun barely peeked over the horizon of the distant alien world, casting an eerie glow on the sleek, towering structures of the Galactic Coalition's War Academy. It was a place where the finest military minds from all across the galaxy honed their skills, a place where countless species trained in the art of warfare. Yet, today, something was different. In the vast training hall, where the hum of advanced equipment filled the air, all eyes were on a newcomer, Lieutenant Alina Blake, the human officer from Earth. The other trainees, all seasoned warriors from species with centuries of advanced military knowledge, watched her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. After all, humans were a primitive species, born on a harsh, dangerous planet. It was hard to imagine how someone so seemingly unremarkable could have earned a place among the galaxy's elite. Alina stood in front of a large, holographic battlefield projection where a simulated war scenario was about to unfold. The mission was straightforward: defend a critical outpost against a coordinated alien invasion. The odds were overwhelming, an enemy force far superior in numbers and technology, a force that any other species would have treated with utmost seriousness. To the alien instructors who stood on the sidelines, this was a simple test. They expected her to falter, to make mistakes, to act impulsively, perhaps even recklessly. It was, after all, the human way at least. That was the stereotype. As the simulation began, the enemy forces surged forward. The sound of digital explosions and the whir of energy weapons filled the air. The other trainees, with their calculated movements and disciplined formations, immediately took cover, coordinating their actions in a precise, textbook fashion. Alina, however, did something unexpected. Rather than follow the usual tactics of fortifying her position, she casually stepped outside the defensive perimeter. Her comrades looked at her with confusion, but she remained calm, almost carefree. The alien instructors, watching from the observation room, exchanged puzzled glances. What was she doing? Was she panicking? Was she about to make a catastrophic mistake? But Alina's movements were deliberate, her actions strategic in a way that none of the aliens could immediately understand. Instead of retreating to a secure position, she darted between obstacles with quick, almost reckless abandon, taking advantage of the terrain in ways that seemed completely illogical to the more experienced combatants. She was using the environment, not to defend herself, but to lure the enemy into traps they hadn't seen coming. The aliens had expected a predictable defense, a series of well-placed forces holding their ground, but what they saw was something entirely different. As the enemy forces advanced, Alina calmly guided her team into the heart of the battle, weaving through the chaos. She set up distractions, small explosions, noise decoys, and even a few well-timed smoke screens. Her team followed her lead, executing moves that were messy but incredibly effective. The enemy, confused by the strange tactics, began to falter. Every trap set by Alina seemed to catch them off guard, every ambush landing a devastating blow. The alien instructors, who had spent years mastering complex military strategies, couldn't understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't the rigid, calculated warfare they had come to expect. It was something else, something unpredictable, something uniquely human. The simulation, once dominated by the enemy, quickly turned in Alina's favor. With every passing minute, her unorthodox tactics overwhelmed the opposition. The aliens, who had prided themselves on their superior technology and training, were losing ground. It was as if Alina knew exactly how they thought, knew exactly what they would do next, and used that knowledge to her advantage. Her squad, a mixture of human and alien soldiers, followed her lead with growing confidence. They didn't question her decisions, they trusted her. And as they watched the enemy forces retreat, they realized something: Alina had done the impossible. By the time the simulation ended, the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of alien machines and the silent remains of fallen soldiers. Alina's squad stood victorious, though not a single member of her team seemed particularly thrilled. They weren't celebrating, nor were they panicking. They were simply calm, almost indifferent to the chaos around them. Alina herself barely looked up as the simulation ended, wiping a few beads of sweat from her forehead, as if she'd just finished a casual workout rather than a life-or-death battle. The instructors, standing in the observation room, were left speechless. The human officer had defied everything they knew about warfare. It wasn't just her tactics, they were simple, even messy at times. But her ability to turn chaos into victory, to use the unexpected to her advantage, was something they hadn't anticipated. They had assumed that humans, with their primitive background, would rely on brute force or rash decisions. Instead, Alina had shown them that the human way was different. It was unpredictable. It was unorthodox. And, to their shock, it worked. The aliens, known for their discipline and strict adherence to logic, began to question their assumptions about humans. What kind of species could fight like this? What kind of species could take on an overwhelming force and win, not through superior technology or numbers, but through sheer creativity and adaptation? They couldn't deny it. Alina had done something remarkable, something none of them had expected. And yet, she seemed completely unfazed by it all. As the simulation ended, and the holographic battlefield faded into nothingness, the other trainees gathered around Alina. They were still unsure of how to react. Some were impressed, others bewildered, but all of them recognized something in her, something they hadn't seen in their own species. It wasn't fear, it wasn't arrogance. It was confidence in the face of chaos, an almost casual disregard for the normal rules of warfare. For the first time, they realized that they didn't fully understand humanity. They didn't know how humans fought, and that made them more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Alina, however, didn't seem to notice the shift in the room. She simply stood there, wiping her brow, her gaze distant, as if the battle had been just another day in the field. She looked out at the instructors, whose expressions ranged from confusion to grudging respect, and smiled faintly. "It's not about having the best equipment or the most advanced strategies," she said, her voice calm and steady. "It's about knowing how to survive when the odds are stacked against you." The instructors exchanged looks, a mix of awe and disbelief. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, and as they filed out of the room, still processing what had just happened, one thought echoed in their minds: the human way of fighting was nothing like they had ever seen before. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and Alina Blake, a single human soldier, had shaken the very foundation of their beliefs about warfare. The day after Alina Blake's stunning victory in the simulation, the atmosphere within the Galactic Coalition's War Academy was heavy with quiet whispers. The alien instructors gathered in a large circular room, their faces tight with concentration. They sat at a sleek table made of dark, reflective material, screens flickering with data and holographic displays showing the aftermath of the battle. All of them were experienced military strategists from species that had fought in countless intergalactic wars. They had seen all kinds of tactics, from the predictable to the extraordinary. Yet nothing about Alina's actions made sense to them. It was almost as if she had thrown the rulebook out the window. None of them had expected such an unorthodox approach to succeed. They had been so certain of the outcome, so confident that her primitive human mind would falter under pressure. Yet, here they were, questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare. The chief instructor, a tall, insectoid alien named Vrakal, stood up and activated a large holographic display in the center of the room. It showed the detailed breakdown of the simulation from start to finish, with every move Alina made marked out in bright red. "Look here," Vrakal said, pointing to a series of tactical blunders that, in the eyes of any other strategist, would have been considered fatal mistakes. She exposed her position to the enemy. She didn't establish a defensive perimeter. She used limited resources for traps and distractions. And yet, she won. His voice was tinged with disbelief. How? They had seen her succeed, but they had yet to understand why she succeeded. The analysis of her actions had begun, and though the data was clear, it didn't offer any comforting answers. Vrakal scrolled through the footage, freezing at key moments where Alina made decisions that defied conventional military logic. She had no support from long-range artillery or high-tech surveillance drones. Instead, she used basic tools and clever misdirection shadows, sounds, and terrain, anything to throw off the enemy. But what really struck them was how calm she had been throughout it all. While other trainees would have been sweating in panic, Alina had acted as if she were simply taking a stroll in a park. "Her unpredictability is what made her so dangerous," Vrakal continued almost to himself. "We couldn't predict her actions. There was no pattern to follow. It was like facing a creature who didn't think like any other species we've encountered. He turned to the others, his eyes narrowed. This is beyond human instinct. This is something else. Zareth, a calculating and methodical strategist from the amphibious Exarac race, spoke up, his tone unusually thoughtful. Perhaps it's because humans expect chaos. Perhaps the unpredictable is what they thrive on. It's not that she's ignoring strategy, she's just applying it in a completely different manner. The whole battlefield was her weapon, not just the tools she was given. An uncomfortable silence filled the room as the instructors absorbed this thought. Zareth was right. Humans, they realized, did not fear unpredictability the way other species did. They had grown up in an environment where survival was never guaranteed. They had learned to adapt to chaos, to bend it to their will. It wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about outlasting everything thrown at them, about turning their enemy's advantage into their own weakness. Vrakal resumed scrolling through the simulation data, his mandibles clicking in agitation. But still, the human way is primitive. There's no precision, no honor, no sophistication. He paused, looking at the others. Is it possible we underestimated them? Another instructor, Gorth, a muscular and proud warrior from the Garathian race, scoffed at the idea. This isn't the way of war. Strategy is about control, about order. Her tactics were messy, sloppy even. How could that possibly work against a force like the one we created for her? Yet, there was no denying the outcome. Alina Blake had won. And with every passing moment, the data showed just how close her victory had been. The alien forces had been close to breaking through her defenses more than once. If it weren't for a few quick thinking decisions, the result would have been very different. That fact alone kept the instructors from dismissing her methods entirely. The human mind doesn't process war the way we do, Zareth muttered, his large eyes narrowing in thought. I think we're looking at this all wrong. What if the unpredictability itself is a tactic? A psychological weapon? This notion struck the group hard. They had always prided themselves on their calm, calculated thinking. Their species valued precision and control, prided themselves on outsmarting their enemies with brilliant but rigid tactics. The idea that humans might want their opponents to be unsure, uncertain, and unsettled was unnerving. In a universe full of perfectly executed strategies, the human approach was like an unpredictable storm, tearing through the calm and leaving chaos in its wake. Varakal's eyes flicked to the holographic simulation, his gaze lingering on the moment where Alina had made the most confusing move of all, leading her team directly into the heart of the enemy's advance, a move that seemed certain to result in a slaughter. Instead, she had used that very vulnerability as a trap, drawing the enemy into a position where her team could strike back with brutal efficiency. She wanted them to think she was vulnerable, Vrakal muttered under his breath. And they fell for it. The enemy was lulled into a sense of superiority, and then she struck. They didn't know what hit them. It was a realization that sent a ripple of unease through the instructors. If humanity had perfected this ability to turn unpredictability into a weapon, then they had something that no other species had, a power that no advanced technology could replicate. It was psychological warfare, taken to the extreme. But the most unsettling thing was the human attitude itself. Alina Blake had not acted out of desperation or overconfidence. She had been calm throughout, almost detached, as though she were simply carrying out a routine task. The instructors had expected a human to crack under pressure, to panic and fail. Yet, Alina's demeanor was almost casual. It was as if she had been trained to fight with the belief that the universe itself was chaotic and dangerous, and that chaos was something to embrace rather than fear. As the analysis continued, it became clear Alina Blake wasn't just fighting to win. She was fighting to survive, using every tool, every scrap of knowledge, and every ounce of instinct to stay one step ahead. The human way of war wasn't about being the most efficient, the most organized, or the most technologically advanced. It was about adapting, about finding a way to turn every moment to their advantage, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The instructors sat in stunned silence as the final pieces of the simulation data flashed across the screen. They had been forced to confront a terrifying truth. Humanity, with its messy, unpredictable methods, might be the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And Alina Blake, with her nonchalant, almost effortless victory, had just proven it. Vrakal, the chief instructor, finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. We thought we understood warfare. But I fear we have just scratched the surface of what humans are capable of. This is just the beginning. The room grew quiet, each instructor lost in their own thoughts. They had come to a conclusion that was as unsettling as it was undeniable. Humanity's unique approach to war was a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. And the galaxy would soon learn that the human way of fighting could not be easily defeated. It was only a matter of time before they would have to face it again, perhaps in a much larger conflict than anyone could imagine. The training room was thick with tension as the instructors prepared for the next phase of the simulation. This time, they had decided to test Alina Blake in a different way. The environment had changed. The stakes were higher. The galaxy's elite war academy had devised a scenario that would push her to her limits. The simulation was simple in concept. Alina's squad had to move through a dense urban war zone filled with traps and ambushes, while remaining undetected by a hidden enemy force, a test of both strategy and adaptability. The perfect opportunity to test if her previous success had been a fluke or if humanity really had something to offer in the art of war. The simulation began, and immediately, the streets around Alina's squad were filled with the noise of distant explosions, the hum of plasma weapons, and the unsettling quiet that always signaled something dangerous was nearby. Her squad, a mixture of humans and other species, moved carefully through the narrow alleys of the city, aware of the threat that hung over them. They knew the enemy could be anywhere, watching from above or hiding in the shadows. The plan was clear: move cautiously, stay in tight formation, and avoid confrontation at all costs. But as the minutes stretched on, Alina's instincts began to pick up on something that didn't feel right. There was something in the air, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The alien instructors, watching from their observation deck, were confident that this would be the moment Alina would fail. They had set up the perfect trap, a coordinated, stealthy ambush that would catch even the most experienced soldiers off guard. The enemy had already infiltrated the area, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The instructors could almost predict where Alina would go next, where her squad would make the fatal mistake. It was supposed to be a textbook victory for the hidden enemy, a demonstration of how humans lack the discipline and foresight to anticipate such a cunning assault. But Alina wasn't following the book. As her squad moved deeper into the city's ruins, she slowed down. She wasn't in a rush. The others were moving forward cautiously, scanning every rooftop, every corner. They were all on edge, expecting the worst. Alina, however, kept her cool. She walked slower, her eyes scanning the environment with an almost unnatural calmness, her senses open to the world around her. She was waiting for something, waiting for the faintest sign that would confirm her suspicion. The city was too quiet, the enemy's presence too subtle. That's when she saw a slight flicker in the corner of her eye, the shadow of something moving in the distance, a shimmer that didn't belong. It was the smallest of signs, but it was enough. "Hold up," Alina said quietly, signaling her squad to stop. Her voice was calm, almost disinterested, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the skyline. Her team looked to her, uncertain, but they knew better than to question her instincts. They'd already learned that she saw things others didn't. The instructors were watching closely, unsure of what to make of this. Alina had stopped. The plan was to keep moving, to push through the city and avoid getting caught in an ambush. But Alina wasn't following the plan. She was waiting. The instructors began to exchange glances. What was she doing? They had prepared for every possible move, every possible decision. Had they miscalculated? Or was this a human flaw too cautious, too slow? Alina's squad was tense, their fingers resting on their weapons, but they knew this wasn't a time to rush. Slowly, Alina crouched down, examining the ground in front of her. She was looking for any clue, any sign that the enemy had been here recently. Her squad followed her lead, keeping their heads down and their senses heightened. The tension was thick, almost unbearable. The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the distance, but no one dared to move. The silence was eerie, broken only by the faint hum of the city's collapsed infrastructure and the distant sounds of warfare outside the simulation's borders. Then, without warning, Alina gave a sharp signal. "Ambush," she muttered under her breath, and within seconds her squad scattered, moving to cover, their weapons raised. The instructors, watching from their control room, were momentarily stunned. How had she known? The enemy had set up a complex series of traps and ambush points, yet Alina had known where they were. Every step of the simulation was carefully controlled, designed to surprise her, yet she had turned it on its head. She had anticipated their every move. The ambush came quickly. A barrage of energy blasts erupted from multiple rooftops, the streets coming alive with the flashes of plasma fire. The enemy was everywhere, raining down fire from above, surrounding Alina's squad in a deadly vice. But instead of panicking, Alina remained eerily calm, guiding her squad through the chaos. Her voice was steady as she barked orders. "Split up. Cover the exits. Keep your heads down." The squad members scrambled into position, quickly taking cover behind debris, walls, and abandoned vehicles. Alina's calm, nonchalant demeanor was like a rock in the middle of the storm. The enemy began to close in, their snipers picking off anyone who made a mistake, any soldier who exposed themselves for even a second. The instructors watched as Alina's squad was pushed to the edge. They had no air support, no reinforcements. And yet, Alina wasn't faltering. The simulation was designed to overwhelm them, to force them into a corner. It was supposed to be a trap they couldn't escape from. But Alina was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She wasn't just reacting to the enemy's moves. She was setting them up, drawing them into her own game. The instructors watched as she calmly observed the attackers, noticing the patterns in their movements, the way they communicated. They were taking too long to close in, and she knew why, because they thought they had all the time in the world. A cold smile crossed Alina's face. She was ready. Without a word, she pulled a small device from her belt, a simple piece of tech, but one that had been modified in a way the instructors hadn't expected. With a swift motion, she tossed it into the center of the street. The device whined briefly, then released a blinding flash of light. The enemy, caught off guard by the sudden disruption, hesitated. It was just the opening Alina needed. "Now!" she shouted, and in an instant, her squad sprang into action. They didn't charge blindly, like most soldiers would. They didn't rush forward in a panic. Instead, they worked together, covering each other's movements, staying in sync. The enemy, disoriented and confused by the unexpected turn of events, was scattered. Alina's squad took advantage of the chaos, picking off the enemy soldiers one by one, using their confusion as cover. Within moments, the ambush that was supposed to wipe them out had turned into their victory. The instructors sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they were seeing. How had she done it? They had set up the perfect trap, the perfect kill zone. Through it, she had turned the entire situation around, using the chaos to her advantage in ways they hadn't imagined. The holographic battlefield flickered as the simulation came to an end. The instructors were left in stunned silence, still processing the turn of events. Alina's squad stood victorious, but there was no celebration. They simply stood, waiting for the next order, their eyes alert and focused. Alina, once again, seemed almost indifferent to the outcome. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving, adapting, and doing whatever it took to come out on top. The instructors had underestimated her, and now they were left questioning everything they knew about warfare. As the simulation ended, Vrakal, the chief instructor, leaned back in his chair, his insectoid eyes narrowing. "She's done it again," he muttered. "I don't know how she does it, but she's done it again." Zarif looked at him, his expression grim. "The question is, how do we stop it?" The mood inside the Galactic Coalition's War Academy was heavy with tension. The instructors had watched, once again, as Alina Blake turned their carefully crafted ambush into an absolute defeat for the hidden enemy. It was clear now that the human had no intentions of playing by the rules, and the instructors had no intention of letting this challenge slide. This time, they prepared something far more sophisticated. They had studied her behavior, analyzed her actions, and they were ready to push her beyond anything she had faced so far. They were going to break her calm, make her doubt herself, and force her to fail. The plan was simple but dangerous, a counteroffensive designed to overwhelm Alina's squad with no mercy, no room for mistakes. The instructors had restructured the simulation into a full-scale assault, no longer just small skirmishes, but a massive, coordinated offensive from multiple directions. It would test everything: Alina's tactical brilliance, her ability to stay calm under pressure, and her instinct. The battle was set to begin, and this time, the stakes were higher. Failure wasn't just a loss of the simulation, it would mean the collapse of everything Alina had worked for. Alina stood in front of her squad, the weight of the upcoming battle settling into her bones. She could feel the cold, calculated anticipation in the air. This was it. The real test. The last simulation had been a victory, yes, but this would be different. The enemy wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. They were coming for her, ready to smash through every defense, every trap, every calculated move she would make. And yet, even with that knowledge, there was no panic in her eyes. She had fought worse than this in the past. She had survived worse than this. The galaxy's most advanced minds had tried and failed to break her before. Today would be no different. Stay sharp. Alina's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of command. Don't give them a chance. We're not running. We're not hiding. We're going to hit them harder than they think. Her squad nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of determination and uncertainty. None of them had ever seen a full-scale counteroffensive before, and the unknown loomed ahead like a shadow. But Alina wasn't concerned with the unknown. She was concerned with what she did know: their enemies would underestimate them, and that would be their downfall. The first wave came within minutes. A volley of energy blasts rained down from the sky, lighting up the sky like a distant storm. Alina's squad scattered, moving swiftly to cover, their movements in sync with one another as they disappeared into the maze of city ruins. But they weren't just reacting, they were already planning their counter. The instructors watched, leaning forward in their seats, unable to look away. Alina was already thinking ahead, already anticipating the enemy's moves. The enemy was well organized, far more skilled than any of the simulations Alina had faced before. The first strike came from above, a series of fighter ships weaving between the collapsing buildings, firing down on the streets with deadly precision. They had planned for this. Alina's team had already set up decoys, abandoned vehicles rigged to explode, creating distractions, forcing the enemy to waste their firepower on the wrong targets. A few well-placed grenades and energy mines took out two of the ships before they had a chance to react. It was a good start, but they knew it wouldn't last. This was only the beginning. As the first wave faltered, the second wave hit harder. The enemy's ground forces stormed the city, advancing in tight formations, using advanced shields and armor to push through. Alina's squad was outnumbered, but they had the advantage of terrain. She had chosen the battleground carefully, a maze of tight alleys, collapsed buildings, and crumbling infrastructure. It wasn't ideal for a full-on confrontation, but it was perfect for guerrilla tactics. Her squad could strike from hidden positions, surprise the enemy, and then disappear into the shadows. But the instructors knew this was where things would get difficult. The human advantage would soon fade as the sheer strength of the enemy began to take hold. The battle intensified quickly. Explosions shook the ground beneath them, and the air filled with the acrid scent of burning metal and smoke. Alina's squad was constantly on the move, staying just one step ahead of the advancing enemy forces. Every time they thought they were safe, a new wave of attackers would arrive, pushing them further into a corner. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a psychological one. The instructors had intentionally designed the simulation to be disorienting, to make Alina's team question their own strategy, to wear them down mentally. Alina's mind raced. She had anticipated this kind of pressure. She knew that, sooner or later, the enemy would regroup and come at them with everything they had. And they had already begun to do just that. The sheer number of enemies was overwhelming, but Alina's focus remained unshaken. Her squad was tired, but they weren't broken. She couldn't afford for them to lose hope, not now. They were only as strong as she led them to BE.in a split-second decision. Alina issued a new command. "We split up," she said, her voice steady, almost eerily calm. "The enemy's getting too close. We need to hit them from multiple angles. Disrupt their lines. They won't know where the next strike is coming from." The squad moved without hesitation, scattering in different directions. They weren't running. They were repositioning, setting up traps, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alina herself moved swiftly through the ruins, blending into the chaos, a shadow among shadows. She knew the enemy's movements by heart, now knew where they would be and when. The simulation was designed to test her, but it was now becoming clear that it was the enemy who was being tested. They had underestimated her once again. Minutes later, the final phase of the counteroffensive began. The enemy was closing in on Alina's squad, and the instructors felt confident that this would be the moment of their victory. They could see Alina's squad was beginning to falter, their resources running thin. The constant pressure was starting to take its toll, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they broke. That's when Alina made her move. A series of carefully calculated explosions rocked the battlefield. The sound was deafening as debris flew in every direction, but it was the smoke and confusion that gave Alina the perfect window. In the chaos, she had set a trap, a perfect trap. The enemy forces had been lulled into a sense of superiority, thinking they had the upper hand. But as they advanced through the ruined streets, they found themselves caught in the middle of an ambush. Alina's squad, repositioned at key locations, emerged from the smoke, launching a sudden, brutal counterattack from multiple directions. The enemy, disoriented and unsure of where the attack was coming from, began to falter. Their communication lines were cut, and their ranks began to break apart as panic set in. Alina and her squad pushed forward relentlessly, taking out key leaders and disrupting the enemy's coordination. They weren't just fighting to survive now, they were fighting to win. The simulation ended abruptly, the battlefield falling silent as the last of the enemy forces were wiped out. Alina's squad stood victorious, but there was no celebration. The battle had been fierce, and they were all too aware of how close they had come to losing. Alina herself stood at the center of the ruined city, her expression unchanged, her breath steady. She had done what she always did, adapted, survived, and won. The instructors were silent as the final report flashed across their screens. They had thought they had prepared for every possible outcome, but once again, Alina Blake had proven them wrong. They had underestimated her ability to think outside the box, her resilience, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. She had turned their counteroffensive into a victory, and now they were left with the harsh reality that they had no answers to the question, how could they ever stop her? Vrakal, the chief instructor, finally broke the silence. "She's too unpredictable. We've thrown everything we have at her, and she keeps coming out on top. The human way of war is unlike anything we've ever encountered." Zareth nodded slowly, his eyes narrowed. "It's not just about winning anymore. It's about survival. And the humans. They are masters at surviving." The silence that followed the completion of the last simulation felt thick, almost suffocating. Inside the Galactic Coalition's War Academy, the instructors were still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Alina Blake had done the impossible, yet again. She had turned what was meant to be a crushing defeat into another victory. The room, once filled with confidence and smug superiority, was now filled with uncertainty. The alien instructors exchanged worried glances, each one questioning their own assumptions, their own understanding of warfare. They had expected Alina to crack under pressure. They had expected the overwhelming force of the counteroffensive to be enough to break her and her squad. But instead, they had watched as she adapted, countered, and outmaneuvered them with a precision they couldn't have predicted. Vrakal, the chief instructor, stood at the head of the control room, his multifaceted eyes narrowed in thought. He had led simulations for decades, watching the greatest minds across the galaxy engage in strategic warfare. Yet this human, this Deathworlder, had become the most unpredictable, dangerous adversary they had ever encountered. No one had ever survived his simulations as Alina had. Her methods weren't just unconventional, they were unseen, a brand of warfare that didn't belong in the rules of the galaxy. The instructors had made their final decision to confront her directly, to challenge her in ways that no one could possibly overcome. But she had beaten them at their own game, again and again. "We cannot keep underestimating her," Zareth, the second in command, said, his voice harsh with frustration. The Zulkur, known for their hyper-logical thinking, were trained to anticipate every angle. But Alina's strategy was defying their calculations. She's not playing by the same rules. What she's doing is beyond what we've ever seen in any military doctrine. If she keeps going like this, we'll have to admit it, she's simply too dangerous. Verkal's antennae twitched as he considered Zareth's words. It's not just that she's dangerous. It's that she has no pattern. She adapts faster than anything we've studied. We are trying to learn from her, but we are not capable of understanding her approach. That's what makes her so unpredictable. Alina had begun to notice the change in the instructor's behavior. There was a subtle shift, an unspoken tension in the air as the simulations continued. It wasn't just that they were throwing tougher challenges at her. She could sense something else, something deeper. She had felt the pressure mounting, but there was no fear. Alina didn't fear their trials. She simply adapted to them, drawing on everything she had learned in her life, every battle, every fight. But this time, it was different. As she finished yet another simulation with her squad, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that the instructors were more than just testing her. They were hiding something they hadn't revealed. Days passed as the simulations grew more intense, and each time, Alina emerged victorious. But the victories felt hollow. The questions began to gnaw at her. Why were they pushing her so hard? What was the point of all this? She had won every challenge, outsmarted every trap, and yet they kept coming, escalating the difficulty. The instructors were no longer just observing, they were watching with an intensity that unsettled her. Alina decided it was time to confront them. One evening, after yet another simulation, she requested a private meeting with Verkal. The atmosphere inside the war room was thick with the quiet hum of technology and the faint scent of energy fuel. The alien leader was there, waiting for her. His cold, unblinking eyes studied her as she entered, his alien form towering and motionless. "You requested a meeting?" Verkal's voice was as steady and emotionless as ever. Alina stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I need to know what's going on. Why are you pushing me so hard? Every test has gotten worse. It's like you're not testing us anymore, you're trying to break us." "Why?" Verkal didn't immediately respond. The silence between them stretched on, his many eyes fixed on her as if searching for a flaw, a weakness in her resolve. "You are different," he finally said. "We have studied your kind, Alina Blake. We have tested you repeatedly, trying to understand why you and your species are so unpredictable." Alina's brow furrowed. "Unpredictable? I've just been doing what I've always done, adapting, surviving. I've been pushing myself to my limits, but this isn't about me. This is about you, isn't it?" Verkal's antennae twitched in the faintest sign of hesitation, a rare reaction from the usually stoic alien. "You are correct. This isn't just about you. It never was." Alina took a step forward, her voice a little sharper now. "Then what is it about? What are you really after?" For the first time, Verkal seemed to weigh his words carefully. "You see, Alina Blake, there is something that we, the Galactic Coalition, have never been able to achieve. We are the perfect warriors, the perfect strategists. We have studied every species in this galaxy and beyond, learning their ways, their weaknesses. Yet, in all our calculations, there was one species that eluded us. The humans." Alina's heart skipped a beat. "You've been testing us to figure out our weaknesses?" Verkal nodded. "For centuries, we have been seeking to understand the one thing we cannot control: human instinct. Your kind's adaptability, your resilience, your ability to survive against the odds is unlike anything we have ever encountered. And it frightens us. We need to understand why it works, how it works." Alina's mind raced as the truth of the situation began to sink in. "You've been trying to learn from me, from humanity, to use it against us." "You could say that," Verkal replied, his voice cold but tinged with a strange respect. "The truth is, Alina, we do not want to fight you. We want to become you. We want to master the very thing that makes your species so dangerous, your survival instinct. We've tested you, and you've passed every time. You've shown us the potential of what humans can do when pushed to their limits. Now, we want to know if we can harness that power." Alina's fists clenched as the weight of the revelation settled in. She had thought this was just another training exercise. But now she understood it was never about her squad, never about victory. It was about using humanity, as a model for something far darker. "You're trying to weaponize us," she said, her voice low but fierce. Verkal's gaze never wavered. "Not weaponize, Alina. Understand. Once we understand you, there is no enemy in this galaxy that can stand against us. We will become the perfect warriors. And that is why you have been pushed so hard. You're not just an experiment. You are the key." For a long moment, Alina didn't speak. Her mind was whirling. She'd always believed in the strength of the human spirit, in their ability to adapt and fight back no matter the odds. But she had never imagined the lengths to which the galaxy's greatest minds would go to replicate it. The War Academy, the simulations, the constant pressure, everything had been designed to make humanity's greatest asset something they could control. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Alina felt the cold grip of fear tighten around her chest. Not for herself, but for the future of her people. "Well," Alina said finally, her voice steely with determination, "if you think you can take what makes humanity great and turn it into your own weapon, you're wrong." Vrakul raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" "Because," Alina said, her eyes locking with his, "the one thing you'll never understand is why we fight. And as long as that remains beyond your reach, you'll never truly be us." The room grew colder. The War Academy, once a place of testing and growth, now felt like the beginning of something darker. But Alina wasn't afraid. If this was the fight they wanted, she would give it to them. Because humanity wasn't just about survival, it was about fighting for what was right, for freedom. And no matter what, she would make sure they couldn't control that. With a final, determined glance, Alina turned and walked away, the weight of the revelation settling within her. There was no going back now. The battle had just begun.